Thanks for tuning in. I'm Andy Zopp, and this is Chicago Newsroom 2.0. At the roundtable this week, journalists Hugo Balta, Francia Garcia Hernandez, and Robin Robinson join me to discuss the current state of affairs at the Chicago Public Schools and within the mayor's office. I'll also sit one-on-one with Inspector General Deborah Witzburg to discuss election finance laws and gaps in the rules. And in a bonus one-on-one, I'll sit with Garfield Park Conservatory President and CEO Jennifer Van Valkenburg to hear more about the incredible programming happening this fall at the West Side Chicago Jewel. We'll get started on the other side of a short break. Stay with us.
24 hours after the polls close, turn to Hugo Balta and Andy Zopp for a special live post-election edition of Chicago Politics. Hyperlocal and community-centered, Chicago Politics will feature critical analysis and key insights from local political, civic, and community leaders. Be a part of this important community conversation Wednesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Hyperlocal news and critical analysis. Experience the power of community television.
The City of Chicago Office of Inspector General recently released a descriptive explainer on the rules in place to prevent pay-to-play schemes with city government and loopholes in the law which compromise its purpose. The report outlines the current laws that limit campaign contributions to elected city officials, candidates for city office, and officials or employees seeking election to any other office, and details gaps in those laws that allow certain entities to make unlimited campaign contributions, including labor unions, PACs, and owners and employees of entities doing business or seeking to do business with the city. Joining me to discuss this important report is the Inspector General for the City of Chicago, Deborah Witzburg. Welcome back. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you.
Always.
Continuing to do super important work for the city. So tell us a little bit about the report, why you did it, and some of the key points.
Absolutely. This is, as you say, a descriptive product. This is a transparency effort to make sure that Chicagoans are armed with good and clear information about how the government works. The notion here is that information about Chicago belongs to Chicagoans. And in our work, one of the things we try to do is to shine a light into dark corners in city government. Campaign finance rules have a huge impact on the way government works and doesn't, and they're complicated and poorly understood. And so this report is really an effort to help people understand what it is that is against the rules and what isn't, what the rules don't address as it pertains to moneyed interests in city government.
Right. Wow. So tell us a little bit about what's allowed, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's not allowed. Well, no, let's start with what's not allowed, and then we'll go to what is allowed.
Yeah, I think that is the right way to approach it. The city's governmental ethics ordinance identifies categories of people who are restricted contributors for purposes of political campaigns for city office. So anybody running for mayor or treasurer or clerk or alderperson or any of the other elected positions in the city, there are certain categories of people, quote unquote, they can be people or entities, who are restricted contributors. And those categories include lobbyists, people doing business with the city, people seeking to do business with the city, and then also there are a separate set of rules that apply only to campaigns for mayor, and restricted contributors there include city employees and contractors as well.
Okay, and so now what's outside the rule? So who can contribute in this scheme?
So those categories of restricted contributors that we talked about have limitations, have dollar amount limitations. Most of those limitations are $1,500 per donor per year. But there are important loopholes, some of them big enough you could drive a city truck through them. Those include, I think there are three primary exclusions, loopholes, which are really, really significant. One of those is that there are executive orders on the books to limit contributions to campaigns for mayor.
Right.
That is certainly the most powerful decision maker in city government. That is where there is the most concern about whether there's a for sale sign on the door of City Hall. So we have executive orders on the books that prohibit city employees from contributing to mayoral candidates and contractors as well. So we have those rules on the books, but we have no enforcement mechanisms for them.
Those are executive orders, not laws, right?
That's right. And while they have the force of law, they do not have enforcement mechanisms. Right. So I think that is one important gap. The other one, which looms very large, is that while companies doing business with the city or trying to do business with the city are restricted contributors, the executives and owners of those companies are not.
Wow. So that's interesting.
It is. It is, and it provides for all kinds of troubling situations where if a company is trying to get a city contract, the person who owns that company or its CEO or its vice president of sales or whatever the case may be can give an unlimited amount of money to city officials running for elections so long as those contributions are not reimbursed.
Right.
And that is an enormous loophole. The third category, which I think is really worthy of some discussion, is, as you mentioned, labor unions. So labor unions are entities which have contracts with the city. They have collective bargaining agreements. But the Board of Ethics has determined that those entities are not, for purposes of this law, defined as doing business with the city. And that means that we have very large entities with lots of interests in city decisions who have no limits on the contributions they can make.
Right. Wow. And that becomes particularly important, for example, as we have the elections for the board of education, right? Because CTU can contribute or their PAC pretty unlimited. Is that right? Am I missing that?
We have seen, I think, across lots of elections, labor unions representing city employees.
It's not just the Board of Elections. I just our Board of Education. I just kind of highlighted that, right? Of course, CTU contributed a lot to the mayor's campaigns, right? Which we all know about. But those things are public, right? The contributions are public, and so does that not balance out some of the loopholes that your report kind of highlighted?
The contributions are public, but the relationships between the individuals making those contributions and entities looking to do business with the city are not necessarily public.
All right. So, but like the CTU and the PACs and those are public, right? We will say the CTU PAC or even the charter school PACs are making a lot of contributions, although those are not always clearly charter school PACs. So. How did you make recommendations in the report about some things that could change, or?
We don't make recommendations. We do describe what have been a number of efforts over recent years to close some of these loopholes. Those have mostly been unsuccessful in getting through City Council.
Right. I think the other problem is, in general, I think the report's super important. It seems so complicated to people. So I think how can most people, if you want to support a candidate for office, I think most people feel comfortable that that's fine unless, they're trying to, do business with the city?
Yes. And really the onus is on the candidate and their committee to sort that out and to return or refund contributions from interested contributors. The effort here is not to, and shouldn't be, to prevent people from appropriately participating in the political process. The effort here is to prevent people from buying opportunities in city government.
Right.
And so there are cure provisions if there are kind of accidental or unintentional excess contributions. Those can be cured by being refunded. So again, the effort here is not to, it's not a gotcha with the person who accidentally gives $1,600 instead of $1,500. Right. The effort here is to, as I say, to take the for sale sign off the door of City Hall.
Well, that's really, really good to know. So what can, if people care and want to see, have their elected officials, have ethics rules that don't allow businesses who are trying to do business with the city circumvent the gift-giving rules by contributing to campaigns, and because people take campaign donations, right, even when they're not immediately running for office, because they're always going to have to run again. What should they do? Should they write their aldermen? Should they they should download the report from your website, right?
Yes.
That's the first thing.
I really think this is a sunlight as antiseptic moment.
Right.
I think that we are all better off if people have a clearer view of what the rules allow and what they don't allow, and that's the effort of this explainer. And absolutely, people should call their alderman and voice their support for ethics reform, for campaign finance reform.
Right. Okay. Well, as usual, on a critically important topic that most people don't know anything about, you've taken the time to, put, as you say, put some sunlight on the topic and empower us, because information is power. And so I'm grateful to you for the work that you're doing, and also grateful that you took the time to come back on the show. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Nice
Thank
to
you
see
so much.
We'll be right back with this week's Roundtable.
On a very special episode of Behind the Confident Smile, I sit in conversation with three phenomenal women, Dr. Cordia Clark-White, Adriana Jennings, and Jaleesa Murphy, discussing the critical, overlooked issue of Black women and fibroids. Join the conversation on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
The tumult at CPS continues as the newly appointed school board sits for its first session days after new directors once again ignored the city council's request to appear before the body. During a recent virtual news conference, the Chicago Teachers Union released a new report aligning the Chicago Public Schools Together We Rise 5-year strategic plan released earlier this year and the union's contract proposals. According to a Chicago Tribune report, CTU is calling on the city to de-TIF Chicago by ending all city tax increment financing districts. It argues about $1 billion can be returned to schools instead of to, quote, wealthy downtown developers and commercial real estate, end quote, which the union said in the report, quote, shouldn't get million-dollar bailouts when students go without libraries and mental health support, end quote. The union also recommends that CPS should bill Medicaid for social workers and mental health services for eligible students to increase mental health services in schools. CTU also wants the city and state to revisit the so-called fair tax proposal for the state, which it believes would make more than $3 billion available to schools annually. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor of City Hall, the number of resignations of key members of the mayor's team continue to climb. Earlier this month, Eric Martinez, who joined the administration last year and who had been leading Johnson's day-to-day lobbying of the city council since the early September resignation of his former boss, Sidney Holman, resigned, while 2 others in the Intergovernmental Affairs office were outright fired. Just over a week ago, staffers were advised that Mayor Johnson's communications director, Ronnie Reese, would be leaving City Hall. Whether he resigned or was fired remains unclear. The announcement came on the heels of Jen Johnson, the deputy mayor for education, announcing that she was taking a leave of absence. Joining me at the roundtable to discuss it all are publisher of Latino News Network and host of CAN TV original program, Saison d'Illinois, Hugo Balta, Block Club Chicago reporter and host of the CAN TV original program, Presente, Francia Garcia Hernandez, and Chicago news legend and host of the podcast In Other News, Robin Robinson. Let's dive in and welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with CPS. So the new board sat for their first meeting, and the new school board president is Reverend Mitchell Ikenna Johnson. What do we know about him? Anything?
Well, it looks like he handles questions about like the person that appointed him. He's not, not a long, drawn-out, thoughtful response. They asked him if he was going to, lead to the firing of Pedro Martinez, and kind of that's a silly question. They asked, well, we've dug up some dirt in your background. I don't know, you didn't pay child support at some point and was disbarred in Ohio. I'm here to fix CPS, and anything else is a distraction. So it sounds, of course, it's coming in at a time when combative would be the word to maybe describe what's going on between the board and everybody else, but I hope we'll see some more substantive answers in the future.
Yeah.
And he has an economic background. He's worked with small businesses. He's credited with working with minority-owned businesses and helping them grow. So it's someone that's very in tune in ensuring that he's bringing a background of creating wealth for communities that often don't see that type of assistance from government and enterprise.
Do we know if there's anybody on the board that has a background in managing a large budget or a large organization or contributing in a way that would be particularly helpful to the challenges that the schools are facing? I feel like I don't know anything about these people except their names.
Well, because there was no vetting process that was public, and I don't think that it's fair to leave that up to. It is fair to leave it up to reporters, but to leave that up to individuals who are depending on Chicago Public Schools to educate their children to determine what the background is. I think it was very hurried because the original board members resigned en masse, even though they were the very members that Mayor Johnson had appointed, which I think baffled a lot of people. I hear one theory is that they wanted to get out before Pedro Martinez sued them all, and then they wouldn't be part of that lawsuit. But no, I think we're in a wait and see. How, and what you've done is a good indicator of what you're going to do, but we'll find out very shortly what they're going to do.
Right.
And I want to mention there could be changes to this board after the school board election, and after we know which sub-districts will be represented based on election results. So let's say a district has 2 sub-districts. If the member that wins the election is representing sub-district A and the current board member is also from that district, then one of them would have to go. So someone from sub-district B is represented. So it's a little bit confusing, and that's hopefully something that is not being considered in voters' minds because they don't want to guess what could happen. And they should be deciding on who the best candidate is for their children and the education of their children. But it's something to consider because this might not be the definitive board that we have come January.
I think it's a wait and see. Unfortunately, they're facing some pretty significant issues of their own. The first of which they are so far refusing to discuss, which is the tenure of the current superintendent. But what do we think about the CTU press conference? I don't know, Francia, what are you hearing? First of all, why? Why are they coming out and aligning their contract proposals with the strategic plan?
It is hard to make assumptions, but I think in the context of what's happening, we can see that there have also been some important decisions about CPS budget and some that are to come, some related to charter school closures, and some decisions that, I think ultimately the union is asking Pedro Martinez to assume responsibility for. If he were to leave, then who would, CTU point to? I think that's one of the questions that we have to consider in this context.
Where they're going to keep him so he can be their whooping boy? Is that what you're saying? So they can criticize
I don't
him?
want to speculate, but I think in this context, you have to look at everything that's happening and see CTU backing off a little bit from firing CPS, Pedro Martinez, and now aligning things. Begs the question, what else is happening? Why could this be happening? Another thing that is important to mention, I think, is also the fact that, as you mentioned, CPS Pedro Martinez in the past has sued boards that have fired him without cause in those cases, but also there are caveats in his contract that say even if he was to get fired, he would stay on the job for about 6 months. So there is a timeline there as well that could have implications. So I'm thinking that might be some of CTU's thoughts, and also the new board could be more aligned with their vision. So there are several things in flux, so it's kind of a bigger chess game, if you will.
I think it's smart that CTU is aligning themselves with the strategic plan because they want to insert themselves with that type of language, right? It makes them, at the very least in appearance, seem as if they're willing to sit at the table and engage in conversation. I happen to think that the new board, they've got 2 mandates: to push the mayor's liberal agenda and to get rid of Pedro Martinez that has already outstayed his welcome. And I think that it would be, I know it's speculative, but I think those are the 2 most important things for the board: to push the superintendent out and to continue to support the mayor in regards to getting that loan that they're looking at for the pension.
Really? Yeah. I kind of thought that maybe Pedro won the stare down contest, that it was, you're going, no, I'm not, and support, came forth, and then he started kind of indicating some things that he was aligned with the mayor on, using the TIF funds, for instance, and how can we all get together, being more, just not being so combative, which he hadn't been publicly anyway, but he was kind of, peace offerings that showed places where they did think alike. But I think you're right, Hugo, that he has won out his welcome when that 6 months is up. I mean, I think two things. I mean, I think kind of everybody's right. I don't think he's going to be the superintendent next year this time, but I also think firing him right now, a week before, in the 2 weeks after the election, before you even know what the actual board's going to be sitting, just creates a lot of drama and crisis for the students in the schools that will not be well received. So why not wait? I also think the CTU is taking a different tact in terms of challenging it. One, showing alignment, but also putting some different kinds of pressure, right? So pressure on the state, pressure on TIFs. I mean, whether you agree with the proposals or not, they're proposals. They're rational financing proposals, alternatives to finance to fill what is a very big hole. I thought as I said, I'm not 100% certain that completely eliminating all the TIF districts is good for the city as a whole, but it's not irrational, and it's not the first time somebody said it. And so I thought they appeared to be more. I thought they were kind of coming, like, we're not out here asking for unreasonable things. We're very aligned with the strategic plan. We have thoughts about how we can finance what we want, and what we want is in the interest of students. I thought they were trying to kind of reposition themselves as more midstream and really fighting for the students. And some smart things. I mean, if Medicaid will pay for social workers and counseling, then let's get that money if it's budget neutral even if it's not. I mean, we know that there are mental health issues that prevent students from learning. That's just a fact. We know that housing instability prevents students from learning. It's a difficult thing for people to accept that somehow affordable housing should be mixed in with funding for schools, but try teaching homeless students, right? And see how well that works out. So I do think that you're right, that they've come, maybe they started out on the fringes, so they looks like they've really moved a long way when they get more reasonable.
I do still think, though, it's a Hail Mary pass to think that the governor is going to come at the end and say, okay, well, we're gonna chip in and do some of the funding. We can absolutely. There's an argument for the responsibility that the state has in regards to CPS, but I think these are all proposals, and a lot of them are based on ideas that continue to resurface without really looking at responses at comparable cities like Chicago to really put on the table things that are realistic in order to move the needle in the right direction.
I agree. I mean, I think that's a fair point. It's one thing to put a proposal on, but if it really has no chance of ever happening, what's the point? But we have so many other things to talk about, and we're going to run out of time. So I have two. Let's move to City Hall. Should we be concerned about all the transitions? Is it something that's happening in the mayor's office, or is it any different from any other mayor office where they have a lot of transitions? Robin, you've covered many mayors.
There seems to be a lack of loyalty to even the people that you yourself have chosen. Now, I do realize that people come and go, and apparently working at City Hall is a good springboard to work someplace else, to leave and go elsewhere. But if you look at the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, nobody ever paid attention to those people, but they not only lobby for the mayor in city council, but also in Springfield. So it's a pretty important, if low profile situation. And now they're 3 down and can't really look too good by hiring more because there's a freeze, remember? I mean, I think technically you could. But it all seems to be about, I heard you were talking about me, so you're fired, right? And then you fired them for talking about you, so I'm quitting. It's just, it doesn't seem, and I think it's at this time when we're talking about lobbying for more resources, it couldn't come at a worse time. The communications director who actually was
was his communications director for a long time. He's been there a long time.
It's not a good look for a mayor that already is getting bad press with negotiating with CTU, with the budget, the deficit with the budget. So this compounds it, right? It's just adding salt to an open wound.
So the budget. We're taping the show before the mayor's going to make his budget address, but. There has been some commentary today. Some commentary today that there's a high chance that the mayor is going to ask for a property tax increase in his budget. What do we think of that, Hugo? What do you think?
It's like the worst kept secret, right? We've been talking about this since the summer. Of course, he's going to bring up property taxes. He has no choice, and to be honest, it's responsible, right? Because nothing should not be off the table. There's definitely arguments in regards to increasing revenue. You can't cut your way to profitability. And I think as far as cuts, we're already at the bone, so you don't want to eliminate key services, but property taxes, absolutely. It's going to be brought up, and I think it's a responsible thing to do.
Does it matter that he not only, as others have, said he wasn't going to raise property taxes, but he was vehement about it, right? Should that matter to people in terms of how they rely on him? Robin, and does it matter the tone in which he denied he was going to raise property? Because he was kind of definitive about it.
Well, I said to you earlier, doesn't everybody promise they're not going to raise property taxes? And you did point out that not everyone promises it. But many of the people who promise not to raise property taxes end up having to raise property taxes because you're right, it's never just how much is going out, it's how much is coming in. And I think he might have, thought he might be able to do more cutting than is palatable. I think the labor unions, for city workers, et cetera, basically said, we're not going to go with you on this. And they've been with him. SEIU, along with CTU, have financed his mayoral campaign. So I think when he turned left and found that it was a brick wall, he said, I might have to turn right, even though it goes against what I've said. Nobody likes new taxes, but we also don't like it when our students aren't educated and then come out and carjack us in the street.
And as Hugo said, it's responsible. He has a commitment, obligation to balance the budget. So
I think it'll be important to see neighbors react, and I know some neighbors in areas that have seen dramatic increases over the last 5 to 10 years will not be happy about it. Some of these neighbors may have supported him or voted for him. So I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone to see reactions there, opposition, protests, and even aldermen and potentially city council allies speaking up against this, because this has been something that is very important to many homeowners, many business owners, many people who are starting or have recently started to get, more stability in their lives, acquire property, get those dreams achieved, and then they'll see a challenge thrown to them.
Right.
Because isn't it true that some of the steepest increases in recent years have been in not wealthy areas, but people who are barely buying a home at all?
Yeah. So it's a tough call, but that's what leaders sometimes have to do, is make very tough calls in tough situations. As usual, we have run out of time on some very important topics, and I cannot thank you all enough for being here and helping us think through some of these issues. So thank you very much. On the other side of the break, I'll be back with a bonus one-on-one conversation with the president and CEO of the Garfield Park Conservatory, Jennifer Van Valkenburg. Stay with us.
I'm Francia Garcia Hernandez, host of the program Presente. Local groups are rediscovering ancestral and indigenous practices in Chicago. Can these important traditions be a part of modern healthcare? Find out on the next episode of Presente. Join us on November 7 at 7 p.m. via Channel 19, streaming on cantv.org and the CanTV Plus app. Elevated conversation and storytelling. Experience the power of community television.
Opened in 1908, the Garfield Park Conservatory is one of the largest and most stunning conservatories in the nation. Often referred to as landscape art under glass, the Garfield Park Conservatory occupies 2 acres of public greenhouse space and 10 acres of outdoor gardens. Located in the midst of historic Garfield Park on Chicago's west side, the Garfield Park Conservatory is one of Chicago's best kept secrets and one of the nation's botanical treasures. It ranks among Chicago's most unique sites, attracting visitors from a variety of cultures, disciplines, and interests. Both Garfield Park and its conservatory are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Over the years, the conservatory has been recognized as an internationally significant horticultural facility, as well as a cultural asset to the surrounding community and the city of Chicago. Joining me to talk more about the West Side treasure that is the Garfield Park Conservatory is its president and CEO and president of the Garfield Park Conservatory Alliance, Jennifer Van Valkenburg. Jennifer, welcome to the newsroom.
Thank you so much.
So glad you could be here.
Thank you for having me.
I love the Garfield Park Conservatory, so I'm so excited that you are here.
Thank you.
So we talked a little bit before that I wanted to know, how did you end up in this job? And I think this job is a dream job for you.
It absolutely is.
So how did you end up here?
Yeah, so I have a history of serving cultural institutions in Chicago, starting with the Shedd Aquarium and the Chicago Architecture Foundation, and then Open Lands. And throughout all those positions, I always said someday I would love to end up at the Garfield Park Conservatory, because it combines conservation, education, nature, all those things that I love. And I visited it all the time with my kids, and I was like, I just want to get my hands on this place and add some interpretation. And the programming's always been fantastic, but it's just always been my dream to work there. And I was actually married there in 2008, and a few years later, I was hired as the executive director of the Alliance.
Wow, and you've been there now for 6.5 years?
Yes.
Wow, that's terrific. So obviously, it sounds like you love your job.
A little bit.
Tell us what makes the conservatory so special.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's a public-private partnership. So I have the good fortune of working with the Chicago Park District, who actually owns the facility and manages the horticulture. So we, the Alliance, have been around for 25 years, and we oversee all the nature education programming, all the activation, all the interpretation. So it's kind of nice because you have a partner in the building and the horticulture, and then you just get the opportunity as the Alliance to activate that. And so it's a wonderful public-private partnership that I'm really proud to be part of.
So the Park District manages all the growing and
Correct.
the flowers and the plants, and does the Alliance have a say, or do you work hand in hand? How does that work?
We work hand in hand. We have one greenhouse where we grow plants for the gift store and for our pop-up plant sales, things like that. So we also have our hand in some bit of horticulture. We also work a lot with community gardeners. So we're growing produce in the back half of the conservatory, where we grow produce and then donate that to different organizations in the community.
I didn't know that. That's great.
So Garfield Park Community Council, Breakthrough, and then again the Community Garden Network. Garfield Park's always had a really good history of community gardeners growing their own food. And so we do have our hands in a little bit of horticulture and growing things, but then mostly we focus on nature education programming.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the programming. Sure. So you've got some amazing things coming up, but tell me a little bit about what the focus of the programming is.
Sure. We have kind of 2 departments: public engagement, where we focus on adults and wellness and walking groups and yoga and lectures and things like that. And then we also have a nature education department that focuses on programming throughout the week, about 16 hours of free programming every week.
Wow.
So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Wednesday nights we're open late till 8 p.m. to serve community and local residents that want to come by after work. And so we have a lot of different nature education programs for different age groups.
And what about students? Do you work with schools and students and stuff as well?
One of our other signature programs is the Urban Roots Teen Program. It's an environmental justice program. Started off partnering with just Al Ray IB High School across the street. And those teens would come over and serve as docents for giving tours to public schools that are coming to visit. And we've now expanded to a couple of other high schools because word of mouth, kids tell each other it's a great program and we want to be part of it. So the teens work with us. It's now an after-school program, and they do things like work with the horticulture staff with the park district, or they work with our beekeeper, learn about beekeeping.
We have bees too.
Oh yeah,
Ooh,
we have a lot of bees on the campus, and we make our own honey.
Wow.
And yeah, it's really fun. So the teens really get to explore all different kinds of opportunities on the campus, and then also work on public speaking and financial management because they're paid interns.
Oh, wow.
So it's a really robust program.
It's a great program.
Yeah,
Sounds
it's a lot
like.
of fun.
So what's coming up? What's on the agenda for the rest of the year?
Yeah.
So.
The rest of the year is really just the winter flower show. So everyone likes to come to the conservatory when it's cold, right?
Exactly.
Get a little fresh air.
It's very
and
warm.
Very
in
warm
there.
and balmy inside.
Exactly.
So we do have the winter flower show, which is always a fun time. That's called Snowflakes. And then the spring show will happen, in the spring. But in the meantime, we are about to undergo a lot of construction. So we've been very fortunate. Moving our goal forward, we want to be the most inclusive campus for nature education in the United States. And so that is applied to our programming, but also our physical spaces. So the Children's Garden is about 22 years old and is finally undergoing a major renovation. A $10 million renovation. And so construction has started. That will open in November of 2025. And then we're also adding an outdoor children's garden called the Child Wild Exploration Garden. That's
That sounds
about
awesome.
4 acres outside for older kids.
Wow.
And that's in partnership with our Play and Grow Garden, which already exists for the younger set. So we kind of have we will have 3 or 4 dedicated spaces specifically for kids to learn about nature and come out and have a good time.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So if people want to learn more about the Garfield Park Conservatory, what's the best way to find out?
Yeah,
I'm sure you're online.
It's garfieldpark.org, and we have a newsletter. And the newsletter is once a month, so it's not too many newsletters.
Right.
And therefore it's chock full of everything that we offer for adults, for children, for anyone that wants to get involved to volunteer. So it's a lot of really good information in our monthly newsletter. It tells you what's coming up.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh,
and thank you for what
having
you're
me.
doing at what really truly is one of Chicago's gems. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I'll be right back with some final thoughts on the other side of the short break. Stay with us.
24 hours after the polls close, turn to Hugo Balta and Andy Zopp for a special live post-election edition of Chicago Politics. Hyperlocal and community-centered, Chicago Politics will feature critical analysis and key insights from local political, civic, and community leaders. Be a part of this important community conversation Wednesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. on CAN TV Cable Channel 19, or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN TV Plus app. Hyperlocal news and critical analysis. Experience the power of community television.
On the campaign trail in Michigan, former First Lady Michelle Obama delivered a message to men contemplating how to vote in the presidential election less than 1 week away. This week, I yield my final thoughts to her. Take a listen.
Now, I recognize that there are a lot of angry, disillusioned people out there, upset with the slow pace of change. And I get it. It is reasonable to be frustrated. We all know we have a lot more work to do in this country. But to anyone out there thinking about sitting out this election or voting for Donald Trump or a third-party candidate in protest because you're fed up, let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. So, are you prepared to look into the eyes of the women and children you love and tell them that you supported this assault on our safety? And to the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better by us. We have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment. And we are more than just baby-making vessels. And if you are a woman who lives in a household of men that don't listen to you or value your opinion, just remember that your vote is a private matter. Regardless of the political views of your partner, you get to choose. You get to use your judgment and cast your vote for yourself and the women in your life. Remember, women, standing up for what is best for us can make the difference in this election. So let us use our voices in these final days to make it plain to the men in our lives that we need to stand not with Trump, but with us. We need them to vote for the only candidate in this race who will protect our lives. We need them to vote for Kamala Harris. Kamala, she will fight to restore our reproductive freedoms and defend our health. Kamala will fight for our access to life-saving emergency care and maternal care in every state. Kamala will veto any abortion ban or bill that restricts access to contraception or IVF. Kamala will expand access to birth control and abortion pills. And she will do all of this not because she's a woman, but because she's a decent human being. She will do this because she cares about the lives of people other than herself. And that's really what this election is about, Michigan. This isn't just about what we have an obligation to say no to. It's about what we have the opportunity to say yes to. And we can elect someone who has the experience, the character, and the strength to look at all these challenges and still see a brighter day on the other side. Kamala Harris will see us, all of us. Kamala Harris will listen to us, all of us. She will protect our freedom. She'll stand up for all of our lives. She will have our backs for the folks trying to get ahead and those just trying to get by. And in doing so, she will usher in a new generation of American leadership and send the ugliness of Donald Trump and his politics back where it belongs, the past. But Michigan, she cannot do any of this alone. So I'm asking you one last time, let us not just sit around and complain. Let's do something. If your brother or your son or boyfriend needs to hear your perspective, are you willing to talk to them? Are you willing to send a video of what I've just said? Are you willing to do something? If you have an aunt who's thinking about sitting this one out or voting for a third party, are you willing to have an uncomfortable conversation? Are you willing to do something? If you have an extra hour or extra weekend, are you willing to knock on doors and talk to your neighbors? Are you willing to do something? Look, Michigan, we've just got 10 more days to make it happen.
That's our time. Thank you for tuning in to Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Hugo Balta and I will be on the air live Wednesday, November 6th at 7 p.m. for a 1-hour post-election special edition of Chicago Politics. We'll be joined by political, community, and civic leaders together dissecting the election results and what they mean for the country, but more importantly, what they mean for Chicagoans. It'll be an hour of live, hyper-local, community-centered programming that you won't want to miss. Until then, be well and well-informed.
Reading is indeed fundamental, and a read of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 makes it clear that utter chaos resides within the 922 pages of this dystopian manifesto. A collection of conservative and right-wing policy proposals from the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025 is a blueprint for a reshaping of the United States federal government, one that consolidates executive power while dismantling, by design and active intention, the United States as a representative democracy.
We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
And if federal bureaucrats are going to push this radicalism, we should abolish the Department of Education.
We have taken a meat cleaver to DEI already in the underlying bill. The unfinished work is Amendment 314, which I've offered, which ends all DEI funding.
MAGA Republicans want to get rid of any federal policy that treats minority communities like the LGBTQ community with respect or equity. These conservatives believe that being anything other than straight is oppositional to, quote, families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children, which Heritage calls the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society.
The extreme MAGA Republican agenda is to jam Trump's Project 2025 down the throats of the American people.
Here, citizens vote for their government officials. These officials represent the citizens' ideas and concerns in government. By contrast, Project 2025 assertively promotes anti-democracy. The document is a blueprint for the creation of an authoritative government, the likes of China or Russia.
Project 2025 is a new paradigm in helping a conservative president be ready to govern day one. You know, what we have is a group now that's trying to deconstruct the United States. We are a nation state, and we are, ordered liberty. And what these folks are trying to really do is push towards a one world global government. We are now playing defense with whether it be the DEI or just really attacks on the family.
Project 2025 represents a complete restructure of the American government system. A system in which power is concentrated in the hands of a single leader or a small elite whose decisions are taken without regard for the will of the people.
Project 2025 assumption is that the president has something called unitary executive authority. This gives him enormous untested powers to essentially do whatever he wants and reduces the power of Congress to check those powers.
I will totally obliterate the deep state. We will find the globalists, warmongers, and the bureaucrats who have weaponized our justice system. I will immediately reissue my 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to remove rogue bureaucrats. As many as 100,000 government positions could be moved out, and I mean immediately, of Washington to places filled with patriots who love America, and they really do love America.
Let's take a closer look at the policies promoted in the plan, framed through 3 core areas. The first core area focuses on gutting the U.S. system of checks and balances in an effort to consolidate power under the executive branch. This includes ending the independence of the U.S. Department of Justice, thereby weakening the rule of law, defunding the FBI and Homeland Security, giving the president the power to use all the resources of the federal government to investigate and prosecute whomever he wants, including, and perhaps specifically, political opponents. Reclassifying tens of thousands of civil servants as political appointees, seeking to strip them of civil service labor protections and enabling a president to replace them with political loyalists.
As per Trump's executive order, Schedule F employees would lose their civil service job protections, which meant that replacing them would become a lot easier.
Removing 50,000 federal employees, who are you replacing them with?
The number
and where do they come from? I mean, even if it's not 50,000.
But ultimately, we have to devolve power from the imperial city of Washington back to the people.
But you would fire my dad because he wrote a check to a Democratic candidate without any appreciation or understanding where his political allegiance
we
or
will dramatically reform agencies that take rights away from people.
If they're doing their job, why does that matter?
They're doing their job about a mission that's misaligned.
It's important to note that Project 2025 includes a database to help the president replace these independent civil servants with people who have pledged their loyalty to one political ideology.
You can expect that equity and all of the equity executive orders under Biden will be repealed early in the next administration.
I want to be very clear about this, Allie. This Schedule F order, this was drafted, as you said, in 2020. I saw the draft when it was being enacted early on in 2020, and that is when they started to replace national security experts on the National Security Council with loyalists. And, I was warned.
The second core area centers around snatching away Americans' fundamental personal freedoms by eliminating the U.S. Department of Education and requiring all students attending schools receiving federal funding to complete the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery.
In plain English, that's a military entrance exam. You heard me right. They want to require your kids to take a military entrance exam. And guess who would be exempt from that requirement, since they don't get federal funds? Private school kids. They want to take federal funding away from schools with curricula, books, or classes that address race, racism, gender, and sexuality.
Banning African American and gender studies at all levels of education. Banning books and curricula around slavery. Promoting a restrictive view of gender and racial identities in education, removing LGBTQIA inclusive curricula and policies while compelling adherence to strict definitions of gender.
The idea is LGBTQ people are inherently sexualizing by existing in proximity to children. But of course, we are parents, we are teachers, we are parts of all these communities. And so what does that mean when you have a vision of government that situates us as a threat?
Eliminating the Head Start program, closing preschools across the country, and stripping comprehensive services for low-income families. Ending more affordable student loan repayment programs, which, among other things, would result in a $4,000 increase in annual payments for borrowers with a bachelor's degree. Banning abortion nationwide, including a ban on in vitro fertilization, restricting access to contraception, and criminalizing medical abortion.
You want to talk about this is what people wanted? Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care in an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot? She didn't want that.
Tonight we can report a university has been forced to halt in vitro fertilization or IVF procedures after local judges ruled that they will treat as a legal matter those frozen embryos as, quote, children.
Additionally, the plan calls for using the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as a surveillance network to monitor abortions nationwide in order to restrict reproductive freedom in states where abortion is currently legal. Eliminating no-fault divorce, which forces women to remain in marriages even if doing so jeopardizes their safety or well-being. Eliminating the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. Rescinding regulations prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics.
The president should direct agencies to rescind regulations interpreting sex discrimination provisions as prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, sex characteristics, etc. Meaning workplace discrimination against gay, transgender, or gender nonconforming Americans would no longer be the law of the land. So, in 36 pages in Chapter 18, we've got teenagers operating heavy machinery, workers' wages in a death spiral, roadblocks to workplace representation, legalized discrimination. Who is this for?
The third core area of the plan highlights raising costs on the middle class while giving the wealthy billions, to include cutting corporate taxes by $500 billion from 21% to 18%, increasing taxes for the middle class and working families while decreasing taxes on the wealthy.
That shows Donald Trump is coming for the people who are already struggling in this country. This is his MO. He did this in 2017 with his tax cuts for the ultra wealthy and corporations because that's who he cares about.
Giving employers even more control over their workers to hold down wages. Preventing Americans from forming unions, exploiting child labor, and locking people into lower paying jobs.
Do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care, always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it.
Repealing the Affordable Care Act while putting a new tax on health insurance for millions of people covered through their employer. Weakening protections for Americans with pre-existing health conditions and forcing patients to pay more for preventive health services such as vaccines and birth control. Cutting Social Security benefits by raising the retirement age. As more and more Americans become painfully aware of the contents of this blueprint for the dismantling of democracy, the Republican nominee for president, Donald J. Trump, claims to have no connection to the Heritage Foundation or Project 2025 whatsoever.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do.
Project 2025's nearly 1,000-page plan for a total MAGA takeover of America was assembled by more than 25 of Trump's own administration officials, cabinet secretaries. Trump's campaign press secretary and his advisor, Stephen Miller, star in Project 2025's recruitment video. Project 2025 is the how-to manual for Trump's dictatorship.
In the words of the indomitable Maya Angelou, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I encourage you to vote like our country's democracy depends on it, because it does. Be well.